I like my own boy band. Ooh. Matrix Bowl time.
Is this going to be on the special edition release of Warrior?
This will be the unprecedented director's cut. Ooh.
That is the coolest thing I've seen since fractals became a thing in the mathematical world. Who needs backup dancers when you have your own reflections in real time? Dude, you guys are all out of sync. Will the real Josh Blackman please stand up? Please stand up. Please stand up. You know that there's some person somewhere in the world watching this right
Actually, there's zero viewers this time, but they'll watch it later. Yeah. Okay, I mean, enough of this frivolity.
Yes, you won. Congratulations.
Congratulations, you're the lucky winner.
The winner of what? I don't know, but you win.
That's terrible.
Yes, every chair that goes is an air on. I used to. No.
See, I just put most of the stuff real quick in the sandwich. And Coco's always has time. This one. This one, gosh, basically just let this in. So next week, is that to over?
Yeah.
Yeah. So are we going to try and start doing finals or is it going to
You have an clinic, so I don't have language. But I can wait till.
And that's something we cuddle, someone. That's like the worst part about undergrad is a group, younger for the.
Yeah, I'm not starting, yeah.
So.
If people can get school,
Yeah, I showed up to work in the summer and.
yeah, they bring each other.
Yeah, everyone knew each other. I was like, hey. That's what I feel like about reading every day, basically. As a fiction.
That happened to me last summer when I was at Stanford. I'll see if students
I
can-
did looks like international facts or something. I don't know how to stay awake. It's so interesting. So I actually didn't know when that summer classmates started, just because we did our PhDs together. Right.
Because it's smaller class too. Like,
So I was in the San Diego office, and so there was just.
Oh, you were there over.
I was there for 5 summers after. No, Irvine was there.
FaceTime.
So I think at Irvine.
Okay, gosh, that's.
As soon as the professor gets me text, I send emails. Hey Jeremy, you can keep it, send me a copy of your position. I just want to see how you. Oh, I don't need it. I just want to see like your yeah. Yeah, that piece of. You want to look at it. Dude, I could tell someone, but. So. As a weird conference, a lot. I've never seen maybe more. The one we has is one of the things that we bring back. I don't realize. Oh, nice. That's awesome. Yeah. So actually, we actually got one offer. So I think that's it for time.
No.
Good. It's different in size, but CY, size. Yeah. You want to work? I was like, nice, good friend.
Keep it short, I don't need much.
I think.
Hi everyone, welcome to the FedSoc Lunch Talk. Here we have Professor Blackman. He went to George Mason School of Law, clerked for the U.S. District for the Western District of Pennsylvania, and then the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals. He's currently a professor at South Texas School of Law in Houston, and he's also the president of the Harlan Institute, which is dedicated to raising awareness of the Supreme Court and the Constitution. He also runs a blog, which was rated one of the top 100 legal blogs from the American Bar Association. So it should be a great talk. He's got a book out. It should be interesting. So welcome, Professor Blackman.
All right, how's everyone doing today? We are, and I understand this was your first introduction to a speaker? Give her a round of applause. How was that? Well, I hope everyone's doing well today. My goal here is to explain to you everything you need to know about the Affordable Care Act and the challenge to it, or as we call it, Obamacare in federal study circles, perhaps. The challenge to Obamacare was unlike any others because it really united all three branches of our government. It was a clash of the president, the Congress, and the courts over the core meaning of the Constitution. And this case, perhaps more than any other in generations, tested all three branches in their commitment to the Constitution and the Doctrine of Enumerated Powers. Okay? So let's talk a little about health insurance first. Health insurance tends to be fairly expensive. And there have been a number of efforts to try to reduce the cost of health insurance, the most famous of which is Hillary Care. Probably none of you in this room are alive to remember this, but at some point, maybe one or two. But in the early 1990s, First Lady Hillary Rodham Clinton, she was still Rodham back then, attempted to, she doesn't buy Rodham anymore. Anyone notice that? It's never Rodham anymore. It used to be Rodham, I guess, whatever. So First Lady Hillary Rodham Clinton had tried to institute this a program which became known as Hillary Care, which was effectively universal health care. Okay. It crashed and burned very quickly for one very important reason. People didn't want it. Okay. Why did people not want it? Well, does anyone remember these commercials, these Harry and Louise commercials? These were, whoa, that's not good. Ah, there we go. I guess Clinton's listening somewhere. Hey, NSA. So this was an effort in the 1990s to try to kill Hillary Care. So you had these commercials on, and there's this ma and pa sitting around the kitchen table saying, you know what? I don't want this new healthcare reform. I like my insurance. I want to keep it. I like my doctors. I want to keep it. So the meme was, if you have this new healthcare insurance reform, you will lose the insurance that you like. Well, keep that in mind. The lesson learned from that is any effort to reform healthcare has to be based on a promise, not have to keep the promise, but a promise that you can keep whatever plan you like. Okay. So after Hillary Claire bombed, there was no efforts to reform healthcare until President Obama was inaugurated not once, but twice. Everyone remember the Chief Justice messed up the oath. So he actually took two oaths of office in 2008, and in fact took two oaths of office in 2013 because the inauguration day fell on a Sunday, so they actually do it twice. Obama shares a record with Roosevelt of taking the oath of office 4 times. He's the only president to do that. But thankfully only president twice. Couldn't handle another 2 terms. So what was this healthcare reform plan? It became known as the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act of 2010. No one says patient protection anymore. I guess they've dropped that part. They don't care much about patients. But the key aspect of it is the Affordable Care Act, or now we call it Obamacare. Okay? The key way that Obamacare works is to try to make healthcare less expensive for some people by making it more expensive for everybody else. This is, spreading the wealth. Remember Joe the plumber, right? So for those who are sick and have very high medical bills, Obamacare will lower their costs and premiums. For everyone else who's healthy, young, or chooses not to finance insurance, their premiums will go up. Okay? How does it work? Instead of giving everyone health insurance, is what Hillary tried, this law does something different. It forces people to buy health insurance. Under Obamacare, there's an individual mandate, and the mandate forces, or coerces you, really, to buy health insurance. What happens if you don't buy health insurance? You pay a penalty. Okay? At the beginning, it's not very high. It's about $85, but when fully scaled in, it might be as much as $1,000 a year, depending on your income. It might even be more than the cost of health insurance, depending on what plan you're buying. Okay? So the question is this constitutional? Can Congress make you buy health insurance? Can Congress compel you to buy a commercial product? And this was a question that was never really addressed before. I just wrote my constitutional law exam. If I wrote a common law exam, let's say in 2009, and the question was, could Congress make you buy health insurance? My answer would have been, yeah, of course they could have. Why not? Health insurance is a multi-billion-dollar industry, right? Goes across state lines when you buy transactions. Why can't Congress regulate that? And that was the orthodox thinking at the time in 2009 when this law was passed. But an alternate way of looking at the Constitution, but an alternate way of looking at the Constitution emerged. And this was actually not just in the professoriate, although it was built on that. But this was actually a way of viewing the Constitution that came from a social movement, which we call the Tea Party. We don't hear much from them anymore, but they were very big back in 2009, 2010. And they largely grew and were animated by an opposition to Obamacare, which was actually, frankly, fascinating. And they didn't just oppose Obamacare on policy grounds, they certainly did. They opposed it on constitutional grounds, which was actually quite significant. And the Tea Party grew and grew and grew. They marched on Washington in the tens of thousands of people. And I was actually at one of those rallies on the day Obamacare passed the House. I remember it very clearly. They were chanting, "Kill the bill, kill the bill." People had signs up that said, "Overturn Wickard v. Filburn." They were actually trying to overturn Wickard v. Filburn. People were saying, "Read the Constitution, Pelosi." You saw all those signs. Okay? But all these efforts to try to stop Obamacare by saying this is not constitutional failed. Why? 2008. In 2008, the Democrats swept. They had 60 seats in the Senate. 60 seats. We all know when there are 60 seats, there's no filibuster to stop it. You cannot filibuster anything. So as long as Harry Reid could keep his caucus together and stop any possible defections, Obamacare was a done deal. So that was a strategy advanced by the administration. We will pass Obamacare on a straight party line vote, and we'll figure out the rest later, right? Okay, so this is the actual ACA. Does anyone know how many pages this monstrosity is? 27, good. 2,700 pages. Depending on the pagination, you might be right. But based on this pagination, 2,700 pages. The actual bill was released in the middle of December of 2009. It was scheduled for a vote on Christmas Eve 2009. That gave members of Congress 2 weeks before they had to vote on this bill. Did anyone read the bill? No. I actually did the math. It'd be physically impossible to read every single page of that bill. I often joke it's like 3 copies of Atlas Shrugged, more painful to read. This is a very big bill that has a lot of cross references to other parts of the code. There's no way that anyone could conceivably read this entire thing. You know, if they were on Adderall nonstop studying, like college students maybe, but you know, not at Pelosi speed. Okay. So anyway, Harry Reid kept his caucus together, and on Christmas Eve, they never vote on Christmas Eve. Christmas Eve they have this vote, and it passes the Senate on a straight party line vote. 60 votes yay, 39 votes nay. There was one guy who wasn't there. Okay. Now, was this the final version of the bill? No. In fact, it wasn't meant to be. It was a draft version. This was a initial bill to put all the members of the caucus on board. And the thinking was, okay, we'll pass this version in the Senate, we'll send it to the House, they'll make some changes, fix stuff up, send it back to the Senate, and then they'll clean it up and we'll sign it, right? You know, back and forth. Yeah.
Why was it so long? Like a lot of special interest stuff?
Oh my God, yes. You don't want to know the pork that's in there.
A lot of giveaway.
Yeah, I mean, there's significant amounts of pork and giveaway, but the complexity of this law can't be explained. This impacts almost every single aspect of everything you do. Even something as trivial as a tanning tax. Do you know there's now a 10% excise tax on tanning? This is probably called the Snooki tax, right? This is actually aimed at suppressing all these kids going to the tanning salons. There are provisions in the ACA saying that you have to put calorie counts on vending machines. You know about this? So now vending machines need to put calorie counts, which makes it almost impossible to stock a vending machine because you have some guy putting different, cookies in different slots. This is a mass. Even more so, the regulations that have been issued pursuant to this law, 7 feet tall. We're beyond page counts. Now we're measuring in height. There's this great picture of Mitch McConnell standing next to a 7-foot pile of Obamacare regulations. We are hyperlexis. This is beyond law. We are now not the rule of law, but the rule of blog posts. We get these tweets and blog posts from HHS. I'll get to this later. This law is being changed by blog posts by the week. It's actually embarrassing. But anyway, we're still at year 1. Okay. So the bill passes the Senate on a straight party line vote. Remember, this was not the final version of the bill. Okay. But then something weird happened. The Democrats' 60-vote majority was not long. The previous summer, Senator Ted Kennedy of Massachusetts had passed away. He was the 60th vote in the Senate. Who replaced Ted Kennedy? Scott Brown. Scott Brown, a Republican from Massachusetts, circled around and was able to win this election on short notice. A Republican in Massachusetts won on the promise of stopping Obamacare. This was frankly stunning. We now had a candidate in the United States Senate who would kill Obamacare. And you want to know what? He won the election. Once Scott Brown won, the Democrats no longer had 60 votes, meaning they could filibuster anything. So, was that the end of Obamacare? If only. So there was actually a lot of thinking in the Capitol initially that, you know, what we could just do is maybe take the Senate version, have the House vote on that, and give it to the president. But they couldn't do that. They had to make changes. The bill was a draft. It was incomplete. It wouldn't have worked. I mean, the thing they passed didn't actually work, but that really wouldn't have worked. Okay? Other people said, you know what? This is a done deal. We can't win. We're over. Because once we send this back to the Senate, it'll be filibustered and killed. But don't underestimate Nancy Pelosi. They think where there's a will, there's a way. So had they get this past John Boehner, this huge bill, something called the budget reconciliation process, and this is something of a stretch. So the budget reconciliation process is often used to reconcile budgets. So for example, say the House passes one version of a budget and the Senate has a slightly different version of a budget. They can actually appoint a joint committee of senators and congressmen to come together and iron out the kinks. You know, change a little bit here and change a little bit there. The key part is after this committee meets, there's no filibuster. You cannot subject this budget to filibuster. But this is generally reserved for budgets, as the name would suggest, and minor things. So what did Pelosi do? She used the budget reconciliation process to amend the bill that never existed and voted on that bill to send it back to the Senate. If you're confused, you should be. Effectively, what Pelosi did was she took the entire 3,000-page bill from the Senate, crossed out every single page, inserted a new 3,000 pages into that bill, and then the House voted on that. The House of Representatives effectively amended a bill that never existed. This is how we got Obamacare. This is how this monstrosity, this leviathan of scope we don't even comprehend began. She evaded the filibuster. And with this, they were able to pass on a straight parliament vote. Yes, sir?
So I was curious, isn't that same thing used a lot with taxing bills that are required to start in the House?
Budgets, yes.
Yeah, it's used like the Senate does that all the time, right? Essentially, they do the same thing where they take like an act and just like say, oh, it's the budget act, and then the Senate.
Yes. So here's actually what happened, though. So I'll give you a preview of things to come. Is Obamacare a tax or a penalty? I'll get to that later. But long story short, the Supreme Court said that was a tax. Okay, I'll explain in a minute. Constitution says taxes must originate in which branch of government? The House of Representatives. Where did Obamacare begin? I lied to you. Even better. So the same BS that Congress did, the Senate did first. So who has ever heard of a shell bill before? Except for Derek. Who's ever heard of a shell bill? Get this. So the House of Representatives passed a bill governing veteran affairs. Nothing to do with Obamacare. And they passed the bill, it goes to the Senate. What did the Senate do? They gutted the entirety of the bill and they inserted Obamacare into it. Take a look at it. I didn't even notice this before. But on the slide, what does that say in the corner? HR, House Resolution. The Affordable Care Act actually began as an HR, House Res bill. So effectively, they evaded the origination clause, which says taxes must originate in the House, by taking the shell bill from the House, gutting it, putting Obamacare into it, and then Pelosi gutted that, put another Obamacare bill into that, and that's what the president signed. This is how Washington works. Sausage making is actually pristine compared to this. So because you asked, there's actually another constitutional challenge to Obamacare pending now, saying that the Obamacare, if it's a tax, did not originate in the House of Representatives. That case will be argued, I think, next month by two judges from the nuclear option. I think it's Judge Pillard and Judge Wilkins. So we have these two nuclear judges who were appointed for just this reason, and now they will hear this case in a month or so. Okay. But anyway, yeah, right there, HR, House Res. Like, I guarantee like 5 people in the world know about that, but you guys don't know about that. It's, this is some deep weed stuff, we're really in the weeds. So anyway, Pelosi passes the bill. But I want to focus on a couple numbers, right? So the final vote, 219 to 210. The Democrats had almost a 40-vote lead in the House. You had 34 Democrats cross the aisle to vote against Obamacare. More significant, if I move, I think, fast if I can do it, a big 0 there. Not a single Republican voted for Obamacare. Let me put this in perspective. 49.7% of the House of Representatives opposed the biggest act of social entitlement in the last 60 years. Every other major piece of legislation in the 20th century, Social Security, Americans with Disabilities, Civil Rights Act, Voting Rights Act, you can name it, was all passed on a bipartisan basis. Obamacare, 0. Now, you can read this 2 ways. You can say, on the one hand, the Republicans were opposing anything Obama was going to do, and they were going to stop him. I think that's actually a fair criticism. But the other more realistic analysis is not a single Republican supported this law. Half the country opposed it. And that's a very poor way to begin transforming 1/8 of the United States economy. Right? You don't change the country when half of it opposes it. So even today, Obamacare is at maybe 55% on popularity. It's never peaked above 50% popularity. It goes right back to this screen. We will not ever get past this. You have half of the country room for the thing to fail. My own state of Texas is actively sabotaging it on a daily basis. Other states have effectively passed laws limiting the ability of people to help people sign up for Obamacare. They've actually criminalized these so-called navigators who are trying to help people sign up. I'm not saying this is good or bad, but you know, when you start with this, the ending becomes very, very dangerous. So we go to the White House. President Obama signs it. He has this lovely signing statement with these cute kids standing around. And he made some comment at that time where he said, the battle over Obamacare is over. He said, well, he didn't say Obamacare. He said the battle over healthcare reform is over. March 23rd, 2010. Was the battle over healthcare reform over in March 2010? Absolutely not. It was just getting started. So what was the first stopping point for Obamacare? Constitution. Was Obamacare constitutional? More precisely, can Congress compel individuals to buy health insurance? Okay? So I will give a mini con law lesson now. Brief, I promise. My con law final exam's tomorrow, so my students are watching this and they're very well prepared. Who can tell me what case this is? Think. Derek can don't raise your hand. Derek's our fellow at the Constitutional Law Center and a good friend, so but he can cheat. Wickard. What Wickard hold?
That you probably do your own. Yeah, the state can forbid you from growing wheat, right?
It was wheat, yeah.
Wheat, yeah.
To feed his cows.
Exactly right. So this is a case of Wickard versus Filburn, right? So you had this farmer, Roscoe Filburn, which is an awesome picture of him, on his farm in Ohio. And he grew a lot of wheat for himself, for his chickens, and for his family, right? None of the wheat ever left the farm. This is the ominous-looking Secretary of the Agriculture, Claude Wickard. If you look in the background, you see these projection charts about wheat and rice and various other commodities. See, during the New Deal, they thought it would be good economic policy to help the problem of starvation by limiting the crops that can be grown. I'm serious. During the New Deal, when people were starving during the Dust Bowl, these geniuses thought, I got an idea. Let's pay people not to grow crops, and let's penalize them if they grow too many crops.
I thought that had a lot more to do with, the farmer constituency, but prices are.
I'm being sarcastic.
Yeah.
So this was
okay. Just making sure.
Yeah. So yes, they weren't actually trying to help the starving people in the Dust Bowl. They were trying to artificially raise prices by reducing supply to make the farmers happier. Better? Yeah. Okay. But this was not to the benefit of the consumer in any way, as most rent-seeking is. Anyway, so they passed laws saying you can only grow so much wheat, per year, whatever, right? So many bushels of wheat, right? I always got my measurements wrong. Bushels of wheat. I'm in Texas. Whenever I start talking about acres and stuff, I get in trouble. So, and heads of cattle too. That's the other unit of measurement. So, What did the farmer say? He's like, wait a minute, this wheat never leaves my farm. You can't regulate this commerce. This is not interstate commerce. And what did the Supreme Court say? How is this interstate commerce if it never leaves his farm?
Because he's not buying wheat from other people.
Yes. It's called a substantial effects test. It's called various things. His decision not to buy wheat on the market because he's growing his own in prices in other states. Therefore, because he's growing this local wheat, he was like a hipster years ago, local wheat, right? He's actually harming interstate commerce. Imagine that. Whenever I try and explain this case to non-lawyers, they think, how can that possibly be right? How can wheat that never crosses a state line be interstate commerce? But this is what the Supreme Court holds. So this was the Commerce Clause case, right? So we come to the next case. This one's tougher. You don't know which case this is.
That Angel v. Reich.
Angel Reich, very good. I usually have to show this picture. Now I'm in San Francisco. What's this thing? Oh, come on. It's a what?
It's a happy light.
Yes, but what do we usually call it?
I don't know.
A vaporizer?
It's vape.
Vape, thank you. Yes, there's always one. Except in Minnesota, no one would raise their hand for that one. The NYU kids are like, vape, that's it. I love where I am. This slide gets the best reactions. People I know where we are. So yes, this is a marijuana vaporizer. So Angel Reich had a very advanced form of cancer. And the only thing that gave her any kind of relief from the pain was medicinal marijuana, which under the great laws of California is legal. But under federal law, it's illegal. Well, except now, I guess, in Washington and Colorado, but we'll talk about that another time. So what happened? The feds raided her. They busted her pot. She filed a lawsuit challenging this, saying that this is locally grown weed, the stuff you get at Whole Foods, right? This is locally grown marijuana, good for the environment. Congress has no jurisdiction over it because it never crosses state lines. The seeds are in one state, the stems are in one state, the paper, I'm sure, is rolled from the same state. All the other various indicia of marijuana are in this one state. And this case was argued by Randy Barnett, who kindly wrote the foreword to my book. So what happened in Reich?
They ruled I think 6-3. They ruled that the state did, or the federal government did have authority to.
Why?
Yeah.
Go for it.
If there's a systematic, if the government has a systematic system of regulation,
yeah,
this could, the Reich could defeat it.
Exactly. Okay. So this is actually a photograph of Angel Reich on the phone, finding that she lost it. I love this photo. She's still alive, but not doing very. I mean, she's quite ill, and if I had to guess, I think she's still smoking, but I won't incriminate in this talk. So you both are exactly right. Supreme Court said, listen, even though this marijuana never leaves state lines, her decision to use this local marijuana impacts the interstate marijuana market. Her decision to grow local marijuana impacts the interstate marijuana market. What interstate marijuana market? I don't know. There's no such legal market. It doesn't exist. Maybe like was it Silk Trail or something? I don't know. But there's no such thing. But the other point, which actually Scalia made, his opinion was, look, it doesn't really matter if this is commerce or not, because Congress has a strong interest in regulating the drug trade. And if she can grow her own local marijuana, she can evade the drug trade. And if everyone starts growing the local drugs, they can evade the drug trade. And this would systematically frustrate the entire federal scheme of policing federal drugs. Right? Unlike what the president did in Colorado and Washington and whatever. But this was back in the day when this stuff still mattered. So Angel Reich loses. So what do these cases tell us? Congress can regulate commercial activity within one state. They can regulate growing of wheat. They can regulate growing of weed. They can regulate all sorts of activity in one state. I used that word a couple times. Activity. Activity. What about, to me, it's not an activity. What about if Congress makes people buy broccoli? What happens if Congress makes people buy a GM vehicle? What happens if Congress makes people buy a gym membership? Can Congress make people buy stuff? And let's look at this very carefully. And whether you agree with me or not, I really don't care. But let's try and articulate the argument. In all of the previous cases in the past, Congress was regulating some kind of activity. Angel Rich growing marijuana. I'm sorry, Angel Rich growing marijuana. You know, Roscoe Filburn, the farmer, growing wheat, right? All these cases involve people doing stuff. And once you do stuff, Congress can regulate until you had to do it. Okay, that's fine. We're not gonna argue against Raich, and we're not gonna argue against Wickard. Well, how does Obamacare work? Obamacare works by saying you shall maintain health insurance by virtue of being alive. In other words, everyone meeting certain income requirements is required to buy health insurance. Are they regulating any kind of pre-existing economic activity? No, you can argue with me, but I would say they're not. What they're effectively doing is shoving someone into interstate commerce. They are making someone engage in a commercial transaction. And once they make you engage in a commercial transaction, they have almost complete power to regulate that act. So what was novel, or dare I say unprecedented, about this law was that it nudged people into interstate commerce, so make them buy a commercial product. This had never been done before under the Commerce Clause. This was frankly unprecedented. And the argument went, if Congress has the power to regulate and make people buy a product, what can't they do? What is the limit? What is the limiting principle of this aspect of congressional power? And this was a constitutional argument. So we go back to the signing ceremony when the president says the battle over health care reform is over, approved March 23rd, 2010. This has been amended a number of times, but not by Congress. Every time there's a new blog post on what the new extension is. But this was the law. Within 8 minutes of the president's ink drying, the first lawsuit was filed. We had a massive blitz to the courtroom. It wasn't even a race. It was a blitz. We had lawsuits filed all over the country challenging Obamacare and asserting that Congress lacks the power to compel people to buy health insurance. Okay? Overall, there were more than 20-something lawsuits filed. I've actually lost count how many there were. One of the first suits filed was in Virginia by then Virginia Attorney General Ken Cuccinelli, now former Attorney General, who's actually selling Stand Your Ground insurance. You know about this? So basically, if you live in Virginia and you're afraid that you might kill someone one day in self-defense, you can buy insurance for legal defense. So they will defend you in your Stand Your Ground hearing. I'm not making this up. This is a moral hazard if I've ever heard of one. But anyway, he's pitching this. It sucks being out of office, doesn't it? But there's hope. Charlie Crist is going to be governor again. So, you know, there's always hope for lawyers like this. So, but the Cooch, as they call him, he's an alum of my law school, the Cooch won. POTUS not happy, president not happy. Judge Hudson in Virginia found that the individual mandate is unconstitutional, that you can't compel people to buy health insurance, that this was unconstitutional. So now we had a federal judge validate this theory. Because to this point, virtually every law professor, I'm sure people on this campus, said this argument's stupid. This argument makes no sense. Of course Congress can regulate an $8 trillion industry, whatever it is, billion, trillion, I don't even know anymore, right? But what did Judge Hudson say? It's not commerce. Okay? But the main lawsuit was actually in Florida. We had 26 state attorneys general, 26, come together and join a single lawsuit to challenge the constitutionality of the ACA. This was frankly unprecedented, and perhaps not since Reconstruction have so many states opposed an act of Congress in this manner. Okay? And what happened? 26 states joined it, and they won. Judge Vinson in Florida found that not only was the Affordable Care Act's mandate unconstitutional, but the entirety of Obamacare, all 3,000 pages, was unconstitutional. Judge Vinson wrote that you can't separate the mandate from the rest of the law, that it was an integral or essential part of the law, and you can't separate the two. This was bad news for the president, because now we had 2 federal judges in a span of roughly about a month strike down the centerpiece of his administration. So it's off to the courts of appeals we go. There are going to be 4 main appeals, mostly argued by Neil Katyal, who was then the acting Solicitor General, because Kagan was elevated, and GOP wonder kid Paul Clement, who's awesome. If you haven't heard him, listen to his arguments. He is the best. So one of the first arguments was in the Sixth Circuit in Cincinnati, Ohio. I clerked there, although I got there after this case was decided. And the court upheld, there was actually an opinion by Judge Jeff Sutton, where the court found that Obamacare's fine. There's no problem. They upheld it. So this was the first court of appeals to uphold Obamacare. And so far, so good. President, this is my happy Obama picture, right? Yeah. The Pharrell song wasn't out yet, because he's happy. Right. So the Obama was happy with this one. But the next case was the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals. This was the appeal from the Florida decision. This one was actually the key case. Okay. Why was it the key case? Because it involved 26 states by that point. So basically half the union was joined in a single lawsuit to oppose Obamacare. Remarkably, there was an opinion by Chief Judge Frank Hall, by Judge Frank Hall and Chief Judge Joel Dubina, joint opinion where they struck down the mandate. They found that the individual mandate was unconstitutional. What do they say? Congress can regulate commerce, but that presupposes that commerce exists. Congress can't push people into commerce, because once you're in commerce, then they can do anything to you. So someone has to be in commerce first before it can be regulated. You get that? So the court struck down the mandate. They actually upheld the rest of Obamacare, which would have been kind of odd to have Obamacare work without the mandate. But at this point, this is my angry Obama picture, because he's not happy. Okay? Maybe blurred lines or something, I don't know. But Obama was not happy here. Why? Because now we have a circuit split. And when you have a circuit split, that effectively gets the Supreme Court will have to review it. At the time, a lot of people, me included, thought the Supreme Court wouldn't even take this case. They're not going to risk invalidating this huge law. Let them focus on affirmative action or voting rights or something else, not this one-off. Okay? So the third court of appeals to hear it was a Fourth Circuit in Richmond, Virginia. And I need to bore you for about a minute with tax law. I promise I'll make this painless and easy. Because if you don't get tax law, this opinion won't make any sense, unfortunately. So we all paid our taxes last month, I hope. Well, most of us did, I suspect. What happens if the IRS sends you a bill? What is your only option? Pay it, die. Well, no, if you die, that doesn't stop it either. They go after your estate. Yeah. If the IRS sends you a bill, you have one option. Pay it. Can you sue in court to challenge it? No. The way it works is you pay your tax bill, and then you can sue in court for a refund, right? You can try and seek a refund from the government. You can't sue right away. The reason why is because of a law called the Tax Anti-Injunction Act, AIA, Tax Anti-Injunction Act. And the law says very clearly, you can't go to federal court to challenge a tax until you've paid it, then you can try and pursue a refund. And this law makes a lot of sense, because if people could sue before their taxes are paid, no one would ever pay their taxes. They would just appeal indefinitely. Okay. So let's go back to Obamacare for a moment. I've said over and over again, Commerce Clause, Commerce Clause, Commerce Clause. What about tax? Well, we have lots of taxes we pay. For example, Social Security, right? It's a tax on your payroll. The money spent in Social Security goes to fund various social welfare programs. We all know about this. Was Obamacare supposed to be a tax? Well, if you go back and you look at the law is labeled penalty. If you don't have health insurance, you pay a penalty. That's the word used. It was not called a tax. President Obama went on national TV. He went on This Week, and he said, "This is not a tax, George." He was talking to George Stephanopoulos. He said, "This is not a tax." Every Democrat member of Congress went on TV saying, "This is not a tax, this is not a tax, this is not a tax." This was like the promise of if you like your health care, you can keep it. It's the same type of promise. It wasn't meant to be kept. But they said over and over and over again, this is not a tax, it's not a tax, it's not a tax. Fine. Had it been a tax, it would have never passed because a lot of vulnerable Democrats would not have voted for it. So they said it's not a tax. What do you think the government did the second they went to court? Oh, it's a tax. The second they went to court, they flipped the script. That, oh, we were just kidding. Still listen to the president. It was a tax. Judge Vinson actually cited Barack Obama's This Week appearance by saying, hey, the president even said it's not a tax. I guess there's a stopple there, I suppose, but not for the Supreme Court. But there's a problem with that argument, right? If it's actually a tax, you can only challenge it when the tax is being collected. The tax was not to be collected until 2014. In other words, no one would have paid the Obamacare tax until 2014. So in 2010, when these lawsuits were filed, did anyone paid it yet? No, no one had paid it yet. So would anyone have standing to bring the case yet under the Tax Anti-Injunction Act? The answer is no. Oh. So initially, this was the government's argument. They said, hey, dismiss this case, bring it back in 2014. But there's a big problem for Barack Obama there, right? Who's going to be president in 2014? At that time, maybe Mitt Romney, maybe Rick Santorum, who knows, right? The president and the administration made a call. They did not want this sitting for 3 or 4 years. They needed to resolve this while he was still on the job. Can you imagine that just now I've done the math. Obamacare would just now be in the district court if they waited until 2014. It would just now be going through summary judgment because it was only assessed a few months ago. Okay. So they said, fine, hear the case now. Okay. But if we can hear the case now, that means it's not a tax. So the difficulty is, if it's a tax, we have to wait until 2014. Okay. But if it's not a tax, then we have to rely only on the Commerce Clause. So what did the government do? They tried to have their cake and eat it as well. So what was their argument? This is the trickiest part of the talk, so just follow along, okay? The government said for purposes of the Constitution, it was a tax. Congress has the power to lay and collect taxes, okay? But for purposes of the statute, the Tax Anti-Injunction Act, it wasn't a tax. The same law was a tax for the Constitution, but was not a tax through the Anti-Injunction Act. So Congress could uphold it as a tax and also hear it now before 2014. Everyone get that? This was the government's argument. The same provision in the law, which was not labeled a tax, and no one, I've read through the history, no one called it a tax. They will treat it as a tax for the Constitution. But because we need jurisdiction, we'll treat it as not a tax for the Tax Anti-Injunction Act. This was the government's argument. If one of my students wrote that, I think I'd give him a very bad grade. But this was the government's position. And you want to know what? The Chief Justice bought it. Hook, line, and sinker. But we'll come back to this. So the Fourth Circuit, long story short, upheld the law because he's happy, and the law was upheld, and all was good. The final Court of Appeals was the D.C. Circuit in Washington, D.C., and this is Judge Kavanaugh. He wrote an opinion actually upholding it. And there was one sentence in Judge Kavanaugh's otherwise mundane tax opinion that was of some relevance. He said, well, you know what? This statute, yeah, it's not labeled a tax, but if you change a few words here and there, it could become a tax very easily, right? Like if Congress changed the word penalty to tax, that would make it a tax, right? If Congress crossed out the word shall, shall means must. If Congress crossed out the word shall and wrote may, that'd be more like a tax. Of course, Congress did none of these things, but Kavanaugh said, yeah, but it's close enough. It's potato, potato, right? Tomato, tomato. Okay? Keep that in mind also. So, okay, Obama's still happy. So after the Courts of Appeals, we have a split. 3 courts upholding Obamacare, 1 court invalidating it. Okay? So off to the Supreme Court we go. All the justices there, look how happy they look. They're also smiling. Wouldn't be like that for very long. Because there's actually a history between the Supreme Court and Obama. But they don't get along very well. So who remembers this? What's this from?
That's a lot. That's Citizens United.
Yeah. So during the State of the Union, 2010, this was about a week after Citizens United was decided, President Obama got up there and said that this case overturns a century worth of precedent, and it opens the floodgates of foreign spending. Both positions were contradicted by the brief Elena Kagan filed on his behalf, but we'll put that aside for a moment. Justice Alito must have thought he was still at the Supreme Court, where there were no cameras. And, and he got caught on camera. He didn't actually wag his finger, that's just a gif. But he got caught on sorry, no cats. So he got caught on camera saying not true. He hasn't been back to the State of the Union since. But I think this episode is instructive because it teaches us that President Obama is not afraid to criticize the justices. And in an election year, right, where this momentous case is about to be decided, you need to keep that in the back of your head. Okay? So we go to the Supreme Court. As you know, there are no cameras in the court, so the only way to get in is to wait outside. Has anyone ever been to the Supreme Court? Did you have tickets or you waited outside? How long did you wait?
A couple hours.
Is it? Okay, I waited like 12 hours once. It sucks. And in March in Washington, it's very cold, and I will give you a pro tip. These sprinklers come on at 3 a.m. It's a wonderful wake-up call. Yes, sir?
That's the same wait to get into the Ways and Means Committee before they do the budget.
You got to wait outside, right, in the morning?
No, you wait in a long corridor in the basement.
Exactly.
The Ways and Means Committee room was about a quarter the size of this room.
Yeah. Well, at least you're inside, right? Here, people camped out. So the number one person in line, there was a mother from Atlanta. She had 2 young kids with disabilities. She waited 98 hours outside on the street. She had a tent or something, a sleeping bag, I don't know. But it was very cold that week. It was actually very rainy. It was sleeting. So this was not a fun time, but this was a significant case. So argument day came, and there were actually going to be 3 days of arguments. So let's do the game plan, right? Day 1 was taxing power. Could Congress enact Obamacare as a tax? Okay. Day 2 was Commerce Clause. Could Congress's commerce powers justify this mandate? Okay. Day 3 was a double header. In the morning, we talk about severability. If the mandate is unconstitutional, can we separate it or sever it from the rest of the statute? Okay. Day 3 in the afternoon was the Medicaid expansion, which I won't talk much about, but was fascinating by itself. Part of the Affordable Care Act works by telling the states, hey, you need to add all these new people to your Medicaid rolls. Okay? And oh, by the way, if you don't do this, we'll take away all of your money. So the state said, hey, this is not a fair choice. This is not a deal. You're basically telling us, add all these new people to the Medicaid rolls, and the feds would pay most of the bill.
Well, all of it.
Well, 90% for the next few years, then unclear after that. Right, but eventually, there's no guarantee for a certain point.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, at a certain point, every law runs out. But it was extremely generous.
Right. So effectively, you pay basically all of the next few years. At some point, unclear what comes after that. Right. State said we don't want this deal. So the question was this a fair choice? Right. Was this coercive in the language of South Dakota v. Dole? And the court magically, I was not expecting this. Found the answer was yes. And the court held something with a compromise opinion. States have a choice. They can opt in, and it's like, you know, the was it for the Bates Motel? Once you check in, you never check out. So once state enters this arrangement, they can never leave. Let's people laughed at that. Once people enter, they can never leave. But my state, home state of Texas, they have no interest in joining. And it's actually somewhat perverse. It's actually created a 2-tier system of healthcare where if you're poor in Texas and you're above the cutoff but below where they want to pay, you are out of luck. You are SOL, as we say, statute of limitations. So we go. That's how I tell my students, remember statute of limitations. You are SOL if you blow it. So we go to the Supreme Court. We have oral arguments. On day 1, it was a Solicitor General Verrilli versus Paul Clement, and the arguments have a very interesting tenor to them. So this was a taxing argument day. And the government had to make a couple arguments that were very tough to make, okay? But they made it well. The first argument, ready for this one? There is no individual mandate. What? The government argued, there is no individual mandate. There's nothing in the law that requires people to buy health insurance. So what the hell have we been arguing about for the past 3 years? Well, the second position the government took was based on the first. They said there is no mandate. There's only a tax on not having health insurance. A tax on not having health insurance. What the hell does that mean? Okay, let me explain. Okay. There's no penalty forcing you to buy health insurance. Merely we tax you for not having it. Whatever. You might ask yourself, what does that mean? What's the difference between a penalty to buy health insurance versus a tax for not having it? Well, in human speak, the way that non-lawyers talk, they're the same thing, right? If you don't get health insurance, you have to pay some money, right? Do we care if it's called a penalty or tax? No, we're paying the same thing out of pocket. But constitutionally, there's a difference, right? Why? Congress's powers to tax are very broad. Congress's powers for commerce are broad, but not as broad. Congress, through its taxing powers, can regulate a whole host of activities, or inactivities, as it were. But through their commerce powers, they're limited to activity. So the way the government gets around the activity-inactivity distinction is by arguing the taxing power. By calling it a tax, they get around the broccoli question. Because you know what? You might not like it, but Congress can tax all of you for not buying broccoli. I mean, we do that through various tariffs and subsidies to farmers, but effectively Congress can impose taxes if you don't buy something. We don't like it, but that's the precedent say. So if you accept that there is no mandate, which I think is ridiculous based on the history of the law, and if you accept that there's actually a tax on not having insurance, which is also ridiculous because the law says very clearly it's not a tax, this becomes an easy case, right? If Congress had actually passed the law the government was arguing about, this would be easy. If Congress had made this a payroll tax, just like Social Security, right? You pay an Obamacare tax on your payroll, this would be open and shut. I mean, I'm sure there'd be other arguments, but it'd be a very easy case. But Congress tried to circumvent that by going the non-taxing route. Yep. So, funny story though. Yeah, right, don't joke. The Solicitor General on day number 2, he had done 6 moots the week before and his voice was shot, right? So before he goes to the lectern, he takes a sip of water and it goes down the wrong pipe. And he starts doing his delivery, says, Mr. Chief Justice, may I please the court. He spoke for about 8 or 9 seconds, right? And then it went silent. The water went down the wrong pipe and he couldn't breathe. He was literally choking for 8 seconds. The guy couldn't breathe. On the Supreme Court, on the biggest day of his life. You can actually hear him reaching for a pitcher and you hear the ice cubes clinking around and he takes a sip of water. But the guy's a pro. After he regained his composure, he repeated verbatim his opening. He had his opening committed to memory, word for word, which is more poise than I will ever have in my life. So, I just make fun of these people with animated GIFs. So, day 2, though, did not work so well for the Solicitor General because the Commerce Clause argument was tough to make. The justice asked him, what about broccoli? If Congress can make people buy health insurance, can they make people buy broccoli? Justice Scalia asked a broccoli question. Right? Nino. They asked him about buying a GM vehicle. And the government tried to argue that, you know what, health insurance is different. Health insurance is different, right? Because Congress, the problem, health insurance crosses state lines, it's a national problem, and Congress can regulate this. This argument was not sitting very well with the justices because it doesn't really limit much. This doesn't answer why Congress can't make people buy, a GM vehicle or whatever. So, at the end of arguments, everything looked like it was going to be, as always, Anthony Kennedy's world. Like every May and June, we just like look at Justice Kennedy, we bow down, we offer ritual sacrifices, and we offer prayers and we do dances and such. But the actual deciding vote was not to be His Honor Justice Kennedy. But the actual vote was to be by Chief Justice Roberts. So let me give you a little bit inside baseball, which I talk about in the book, to discuss some of the reports. Now, a lot of you probably read reports by Jan Crawford and others that came out after the case was decided, saying that the Chief Justice switched his vote, and that there was this frantic last-minute rush to try to change the opinion, and they made mistakes where the dissent called the majority, and the majority was called the dissent, and all these errors. Mostly accurate. So let me give you my take, and you can read Jan Crawford's take, and you're welcome to believe whatever you wish. We're talking about this stuff. It's always debatable. From what I heard, and I interviewed over 100 people for this book, so it's pretty sourced. At the conference, in other words, there was a conference vote after the case was argued. And at the conference, the Chief Justice was set on the Commerce Clause. He said, we will invalidate this law under the Commerce Clause. He was set. But he was somewhat wavering on the tax issue. And what that signifies was he wasn't sure whether he wanted to uphold the law or strike it down. If he accepted the taxing issue, that would be a way of upholding the law while still giving 5 votes to a narrow revision of the Commerce Clause. Okay? At some point in April, so roughly a month after the case was argued, the Chief Justice made it known that he would uphold the law as a tax. There was then this frantic volley within the court to try and persuade the chief to come back, and you know how they try and persuade, but he had made up his mind. But that battle to persuade the Chief Justice was not limited to the court. There was a leak. People outside the court were aware of this fact. And they actually tried to persuade the Chief Justice. So you will see op-eds by George Will and others saying, hey, Mr. Chief Justice, grow a backbone, grow a spine. Toughen up, Chief Justice, don't do this. They weren't just idle speculating. They knew what was up. They didn't know exactly what was up, but they knew something was with the chief, that he was wishy-washy, right? This effort, I'm afraid, backfired immensely. Because if anything else, it probably told the Chief Justice, this is too hot of a topic, this is too political, and I should not be going here. So in the end, what happened, right? Well, the court upheld the law. Handshake, Mr. President. The court upheld the law by Chief Justice Roberts. How did he do it? Just like the government asked him to. Okay? He said two things. First, he said, this law violates the commerce clause. Congress does not have the commerce powers to enforce this law. So he spent 30 pages explaining why, under the commerce clause, this law is not proper. Okay? Then he said, let's turn to the taxing power. He began by saying, this law isn't actually a tax. Congress is very deliberate in calling it a penalty, right? So as far as labels go, this isn't a tax. And I'm sure we'd all love for him to just stop there. But unfortunately, like Miley, he kept on going. He couldn't stop. What happened next, right? He said, but I will apply a saving construction. A saving construction. What the heck is a saving construction? Well, it's exactly like it sounds. It's a way of reading a statute to uphold it. But Chief Justice Roberts didn't just read it differently, right? It's not like you hold a piece of paper, you twist it around. He changed it. He rewrote the statute. He said, for purposes of upholding it, I will treat the penalty as a tax. So he crossed out the word penalty and put the word tax in. He said, I will accept the government's argument that there is no mandate. So he said there's actually no mandate. He crossed out the word shall. And he said effectively, as long as this saving construction applies, the Obamacare penalty is a constitutional tax. So he didn't actually say that Obamacare was a tax. Only through this saving construction did he read the penalty as a tax. And there's one important limitation there. It's not absolute. In other words, according to the Roberts opinion, if this penalty becomes too high to be coercive, it's no longer a tax. So say, for example, the cost of health insurance is $1,000, and they make the penalty $1,500, making up numbers, right? It would actually be more expensive to pay the penalty than to buy insurance. Is there any meaningful choice there? No. At that point, it's coercive. If you read Roberts' opinion carefully, I can give you the pin sites later, that clearly becomes an unconstitutional penalty. So the Obamacare law only works as a constitutional tax so long as it's low. So there's actually a constitutional ceiling on how high the penalty can go, which will be salient because right now the penalty is not nearly high enough to actually work. All right, so everyone get that? So now John Roberts imposed this huge tax. Contrary to this cartoon, there is no crime apparently for not having health insurance. That's news to me. If you read the statute, you're now just paying a tax not having it. Okay. There was a joint dissent by Justice Scalia, Kennedy, Thomas, and Alito, and they would have invalidated the entirety of the ACA. They would have struck down the entire thing, which was actually quite stunning. And if you think about it, you had 4 and almost 5 votes to kill the ACA. This close. Justice Thomas dissented also. He would have reversed the 20th century, and he would have gotten rid of just about every precedent we have from the last 50 years. Interestingly enough, Justices Breyer and Kagan joined the Medicaid expansion part of the opinion, where they held that it actually was coercive, that it would be coercive to take away a state's entire budget if they don't accept this new Medicaid expansion. The notorious RBG, Justice Ginsburg and Justice Sotomayor, they would have upheld the entirety of the law, and that was that. So that's the opinion itself, but we're not done yet. No, you're not. I promise I'll have time for questions. We got more. So, well, the funniest part about this was the actual delivery of the opinion. So you know there are no cameras in the court, and as a preview of things to come, the Supreme Court's website crashed on the day the Obamacare case came out. So for a brief period of time, the only way to get an opinion was to have a paper copy from the court. So you actually had these interns in sneakers running down First Street and frantically handing the CNN anchor a copy of the opinion. And you can see the anchor name was Kate Baldwin on CNN. She's reading from page 3 of the syllabus, and she says to Wolf Blitzer, Wolf, put down the airplane for a minute, right? So she goes, Wolf, the Chief Justice finds that the mandate violates the Commerce Clause. And then Wolf Blitzer goes nuts. He's like, oh my God, you know, mandate struck down. The Supreme Court struck down. CNN emails millions of people, right? Okay. Guess who was watching CNN? Obama. The president was watching CNN for a solid like 6 or 7 minutes. He thought his law was unconstitutional. That could not have been a very good time for him, okay? Megyn Kelly did the same thing on Fox News. You actually see her on her iPad was on SCOTUS blog saying, I don't think this is right, you know, but they had that, so we have these screenshots forever. Okay. Had she turned to page 4 of the opinion, she was seeing where it said, but the Chief Justice applies a saving construction and upholds it as a tax. Embarrassing, I know. MSNBC didn't make any predictions, so I guess they got it. They were the best in that limited, narrow context, right? So, because he is happy, yes, he is very happy now. His law is upheld. It is now Obamacare again. He actually gave an interview after this case was decided. He said, I'll be happy if historians call it Obamacare, although when the website crashed, he changed that and deleted the word Obamacare from all of his social media, but now it's Obamacare again. So whenever it's good, it's Obamacare. Whenever it's not, it's the ACA. We'll keep that in tow. So this is our Dewey defeats Truman moment. Like he had a defeat, and now he won. The Solicitor General did, I think, a great job. John Roberts played a sushi with the Constitution, chopped and diced. Glenn Beck went after the Chief Justice and called him a coward. And remember this guy? Feels like so long ago. My God, we're already in 2016. This was Mitt Romney. He case winner where he ran for president in 2012. You may not also know this, but Mitt Romney created Obamacare, only slightly exaggerating. In Massachusetts, he instituted something called Romney Care, which was effectively an individual mandate to buy health insurance. So at every single debate, whenever healthcare came up, Obama would say, hey, you are the godfather of Obamacare. And he was right. If James Carville and Paul Begala genetically engineered a candidate to be the worst possible on the issue of healthcare, they could not have done better than Mitt Romney. It's actually stunning. So I used to end my talk here, right? I thought that the election of the election of Obama ended the fight over healthcare reform. You know, my book ends with the inauguration. I would love to hear what the Chief Justice said to the president. And, you know, I thought this would be the end of it. But Ted Cruz, my beloved junior senator Ted Cruz, decided to read his children green eggs and ham on the Senate floor, shut down the federal government over Obamacare. And this feels like ages ago. But ever remember the barricades at the memorial, the World War II Vet Memorial? People were dumping these barricades in the White House lawn. This was all over Obamacare. And then, oh, poor Adrian. This is Adrian, by the way, the face of healthcare.gov, although the face wasn't too happy for long. The rollout of this website was botched beyond belief. Do you know how many people signed up for healthcare.gov on the first day? 6. 6 people nationwide. So the rollout of this website was an absolute nightmare. It didn't work at all. In fact, people would be waiting and waiting. So the president sent ultimatums saying we need to get this fixed by December 1st. And you know what? The thing they had all of your people from Silicon Valley. They had this SWAT team flying from Google with all these engineers trying to fix it. And magically we now have healthcare on our Gmail account, something I don't even know. But it works. So what's still left? Well, we have this issue. These are the cancellation notices. The entire promise of if you like your health insurance policy, you can keep it was a lie. It was never meant to be true. This was like it's not a tax. It was never, you know, it was not really meant to be true. By the year 2020, this was in the New York Times last week. By the year 2020, 90% of Americans will be on the Obamacare exchanges. 90%. All of you, maybe you're students, but all if you have private insurance through your employer, they will drop you very soon. I will be dropped in a couple of years. I'm just waiting for it to happen. It'll become too expensive. This is by design. Kathleen Sebelius, I can drop this. She's not even there anymore. So she's no longer there. We have a couple lingering constitutional challenges to Obamacare, and I'll do this and then get to questions in a moment. So one of which is the Hobby Lobby case. This was argued at the Supreme Court about 2 months ago, and we can get a decision any day now. So part of the Affordable Care Act says that employers have to provide qualified health insurance, and they delegated to HHS the power to make a rule. And then this rule says qualified health insurance includes various forms of birth control. And not just like, the birth control pill, but also things like abortifacients, what's called a week after pill, which can effectively terminate a pregnancy depending how you look at it, okay? A number of employers who are owned by religious people, corporations, for example, the Hobby Lobby stores owned by the Green family, it's a trust, they oppose it. They say it violates my religious liberties to have to provide health insurance that includes these various abortifacients. Interestingly, Hobby Lobby has no problem with the pill. They only don't like the abortifacients. So the argument is twofold. One, under the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, under the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, are corporations able to exercise religion? That's the first question. I think the answer to that question the court will find is yes. It becomes very difficult to answer that question is no. The second question is much trickier. Does it impose a substantial burden on the religious beliefs to make them buy health insurance that includes these various products? That's a trickier question. My stupid, ignorant prediction is probably the court will find yes, although it'll be fairly narrow. In other words, I think the government loses this case, but I know how badly they lose. So it might be something of a split victory. Two other cases I'll mention briefly. One I already alluded to, the origination clause. The Constitution says taxes must begin in the House of Representatives. Obamacare, we thought began in the Senate, but they did the shell bill swap. So the court will have to decide, is this shell bill charade enough to save the law? Okay. One other case involves the Obamacare exchanges. So the reason why when you go to the Obamacare exchanges the prices are fairly low is the government's paying out subsidies. They are lowering your cost. But the statute as written only allows subsidies to be paid for state-run exchanges. The statute does not give any subsidies for the federal exchanges. Like, for example, Texas, where I live, we have the federal exchange. We don't have a state-run exchange, right? So what did the IRS do? They wrote a rule which said state means federal. I'm only slightly exaggerating. The IRS wrote a rule that effectively said we can give money to the federal exchanges even though the statute is silent on that. And the court is basically considering another. The D.C. Circuit has another case under consideration to see whether that's a reasonable rule. So we're going to have litigation over Obamacare for the foreseeable future. I'm still toying with writing a sequel because since the book has been published, there's been so much new stuff in political development, and I think this will run straight into the next presidential election. It'll be a big issue in the midterms for sure, but I think the presumptive Democratic nominee will have a lot to talk about with healthcare in light of her background, as discussed before. So that's all I have. I thank you so much for your attention. I welcome your questions. So thank you very much. Questions? Yeah.
As far as the constitutional limits for what can be considered a tax constitutionally, but colloquially, something else, a penalty, are we going to see? Do you foresee that the Roberts opinion allows the government to compel commerce basically as long as instituting a penalty?
Yes.
As long as it institutes a penalty up to the price of whatever it is they're compelling to buy?
Basically, yes. So his question was, can Congress get around this ban on regulating inactivity by calling it a penalty or a tax? Basically, yes. And what NFIB stands for is that even if you don't call it a tax, the court will save your butt. The court will pretend it is and let you skip the political consequences of raising taxes, and then 3 years later, when no one remembers it, it goes to court, then they'll hold it as a tax. I think it's a very dangerous holding.
How did it come to be that this has to be under the Commerce Clause? I may be wrong about that, but what happened? I mean, that says the Congress has the right to regulate commerce. Why isn't anything else applicable?
Well, the two main provisions would be the Commerce Clause or perhaps taxing power. Those are the two parts of the Constitution most relevant. And when this law is being debated, almost every single person supporting it said this is under the Commerce Clause. In fact, Congress actually released these congressional findings that said, here is the constitutional basis for this law. The taxing power is mentioned nowhere. They cite the Commerce Clause directly.
So nothing else in the Constitution can be used except taxing and commerce.
Well, there's also the Necessary and Proper Clause, which I didn't talk about much. So the Necessary and Proper Clause, if you read McCulloch v. Maryland, says that Congress has certain powers to bring into effect other powers. So in theory, Congress could rely on the Necessary and Proper Clause to bring into effect this law. But what the court actually said was, this law may be necessary to bring to healthcare reform, but it's not proper. In other words, it's not proper to compel people to buy health insurance. So they were one out of three, sir. They lost in commerce, they lost in necessary and proper, but they were saved by the bell and taxing power. It's all right. Saved by the bell. Yeah.
So I have a question on credibility. So if you look at like the like the poll numbers, like the Supreme Court has basically always been the most popular, or like the branch of government we think does the best job. And I was curious if you had seen any numbers that show how this decision affected that. Because like the one side would say, well, look at Roberts, he sold out. But had he gone the other way, then it would have been, look at the court, look how activist they are. And so have you seen?
Do you know what percentage of Americans can name the Chief Justice? It's less than 10%. So I think you have to look at this a couple different ways, right? People, I mean, Ilya Soman, has he been here this semester? Is he coming? People are rationally ignorant, right? It doesn't make sense for the average person to learn about the Supreme Court. So they're not going to even care what these things are. I think there was a brief blip where people on the right were unhappy with the court because they upheld Obamacare, and people on the left were upset. But that all equalized out. I think what you have to look at is a long term, like the 20, 30-year picture, right? If over the long term there's a trend line of credibility going down, that's much more significant than any kind of temporary blips right afterwards. And these are generational issues, right? These aren't things that are decided in 1 year. Now, if you have, this is the United case with people beating the court up, and then you have affirmative action, then you have Shelby County, you have voting rights of Obamacare. If there's a string of cases, that could actually guide the court. And I think in part that's what motivated John Roberts. He didn't want this to be a significant issue in an election year. In an election year that could take down the court's credibility. I think that had to be animating his mind, although I don't know what is in his heart of hearts. I can't see past those steely blue eyes. I have no idea. Questions? Yes, sir.
They suggested that Chief Justice Roberts' decision was a reflection of the court packing kind of fiasco that FDR engaged in, and I guess colloquially the switch in time that saved the nine. Do you see that comparison as being a plausible one? Or
It's both about Justice Roberts, don't they? Well, actually, so the question was a switch in time. Everyone knows that in 1936, President Roosevelt proposed his plan to stack the court. He said for every justice over the age of 70, I'll add a new one, which effectively given him 6 additional votes, and he would control the Supreme Court. Okay. Now, the history of this is actually kind of fuzzy, but the conventional lesson is Justice Owen Roberts, who was something of a swing vote, changed his vote in response to this in the case of West Coast Hotel v. Parrish in 1937. Okay. That probably didn't happen because Roberts had already made up his mind to change his mind before that. But let's stick with the narrative. The fear was that if we uphold this law, Roosevelt won't pack the courts, and we will avoid this constitutional clash. I think there are some parallels there because the Chief Justice Roberts wanted to avoid this clash between a very aggressive and assertive executive in an election year. I think that's a totally valid point. Okay, other questions?
Well, that's not the question. The real question is whether medical science can be objective enough to really improve health without using the most expensive things they can find.
I don't know. All right, Derek, last question.
I have a few, but did you
All
have
right.
a chance to interview Judge Kavanaugh at all?
I can't tell you that. I'll tell you later.
Okay.
Yeah.
So just what's your sense on how the origination, so it originated in Stanford?
So the origination clause, I don't think they're going to win in the circuit court. But if for whatever reason the Supreme Court wants a way to strike down Obamacare, get a mulligan, get a do-over, this is their mulligan. The Supreme Court has never struck down a law based on origination clause grounds. And the other interesting aspect is, if they strike down this law, there are a lot of other laws that were passed in the same manner. So it opens up a lot of their challenges. But if for whatever reason the Supreme Court wants a do-over and to kill the mandate in this grounds, possible.
On that, from a textual standpoint, you could make a pretty strong textual argument. All you really need is just something to arise out of the House of Representatives. It's a pretty sort of low bar. It was with the text of the Constitution.
Again, there's zero precedent on this. It's unprecedented, right? The courts never really address this issue. So,
but what about the textual?
Text, yeah. I mean, the bill arises in the House. I mean, it doesn't say what it has to be.
Right.
There would have to be a kind of a form of a substance argument, where it's basically evading a constitutional doctrine to no end, right? To try and circumvent this requirement. But yeah, Derek, you're right. Textually, it's an easy case. Yes.
I'm curious, just your own personal opinion with the amount of research you've done. What do you think the odds are that the Supreme Court is even going to touch another one of these cases related to it?
It only takes 4 votes to grant cert.
Right. But
I
see
think
it problematic too, for different reasons on the right. Chief Justice Roberts saying, I don't want to weigh down that path again, and Kennedy saying it's
Kennedy's pissed. You need 4 votes for cert, right? I can see the 4 joint dissenters saying, you want to try Roberts? Have fun. Let's do this again. I mean, I'm always wrong with these things, but I have the sense that there are 4 votes in the court saying that we got screwed, and let's try this over again.
Different case, different facts, try it again. Yeah.
And this is an even easier argument, though. I mean, the opinion to write this, notwithstanding Derek's point, which is it's fair. This is very easy to say that this violates the spirit and the principle of the origination clause. Invalid. You don't have to touch anything else. It would be so clean. This is so much cleaner than Commerce Clause. It's so much cleaner than necessary and proper. It's so much cleaner than taxing power. This would be a 15-page opinion because there's really no precedent to cite. But I don't make any representations. I think this case is probably going nowhere fast unless you have 4 justices who want to say, let's do this over again. I'm still bitter. I'm not over it. Right?
I think it's the wrong justices that need to grant cert with the weak textual argument. I think that you have the textualists. That would be some gymnastics I think they'd have to engage in.
Well, no, but if you actually read the NFIB dissent, they mention the origination clause.
Yeah.
Like the I mean, it's 1 sentence, right? But they mention that the origination clause. So, I mean, they are aware of this issue. And they mention that in their dissent. I think that'd be enough to grant cert. And once you grant cert, we're going to have a circus again. I mean, oh my God, this is by my math, if I count correctly, if we get an opinion from the D.C. Circuit this summer, with the new nuclear option, they'll probably go on bonk. And if they go on bonk, we'll have a decision maybe in the fall, which would probably get us up, maybe if they go quickly enough for the 2016 term. Probably they can maybe swing 2015, but it's looking like 2016 with all the briefing. So that would be another election year.
Did the D.C. Circuit already hear a case earlier this term?
They heard Halbig, which was the exchange case. They haven't heard the origination clause case yet.
The attorney wasn't making an origination clause argument.
No, the origination clause case will be argued next month. Or this month.
There was argumentation during the argument.
Not in the D.C. Circuit. In DDC, yes, not D.C. Circuit. And I will end this officially, but you guys can sit and talk with me after. So thank you very much.
There was a lecture yesterday by